Now turning to an issue that is polarising the UK and beyond, globally in fact. In the US, Donald Trump has signed executive orders to prohibit the participation of transgender athletes in sport and called for a rigid definition of the sexes and not gender to be used. 2 weeks ago, the UK's highest court ruled that the definition of a woman was someone who was born biologically female. And at the weekend, transgender women were banned from cricket and football teams in England and Wales. As the world questions the rights of a very small minority, we can get more insight on it all from co-director of the LGBTI Observatory here in Paris, Flora Bolter. Thanks so much for your time and joining us here on France 24. Maybe let's get some things straight, first of all. Could you give me an idea maybe of what percentage of the population do you think is transgender?
Well, that's a very difficult question because it really depends on the type of question you ask and how you define trans. It's in France, for instance, we tend to go with the 1% estimate of the population. This has been used in the UK as well. Overall, you can have estimates that go from 0.5% of the population to up to 2%. This, of course, varies a lot in terms of generations. So in generation Alpha, you have more people identifying as trans and non-binary than in previous generations. So this is changing a lot in terms of demographics.
Okay, very interesting, but still a tiny, tiny percentage of the population. And
Very small.
As you're saying there, clearly there's always been transgender people as far as humanity goes back.
Yes.
So
absolutely, it's something. Yeah.
You know, you can
excuse me.
Tell me. Yeah, go on. It's always been part of us.
Yes. Well. Yes, it has absolutely. It is something that we have been able to see even in archaeological finds. People living in a gender that does not necessarily match their DNA or the analysis we can do of their bones. That's something we know. We have in history, which is to say, with documents and with recorded history, we have traces of people living in another gender than the one they were identified with at birth very early on. And certainly this has been the case in situations where they were very heavily repressed. So this is a given. It's part of human diversity, and it's something that has been part of diversity for as long as we have known, for as long as there have been societies. So now it's more visible because people are expressing it more and being accepted more, and therefore more visible. But it's something that has always been there.
So on the one hand, people are being more open about it, perhaps, but the lives of transgender people have become a political issue. And who or what do you think is behind that?
Well, what we see is from 2016, 2018 on, there has been a very strong focus specifically on trans issues, which was a shift from the American ultra-conservative groups, such as the Heritage Foundation or the American Principles Project, for instance. They have deliberately targeted trans persons because they realized they were getting nowhere with the marriage equality issue, and this is very well documented. So there has been a focus, and it's very clear in the press coverage in many different countries, and this is certainly the case in the US and in the UK. It's also starting to be the case in France. There has been an increase of polarizing stories and misrepresentations on the general scientific consensus, as you know, the consensus that WHO is working from, and so there has been an onslaught of junk science and various narratives, such as the idea that trans women would have an unfair advantage in sports, or that they would represent a danger in single-sex settings, which is not supported by facts. This is not something that we have seen in data. And so there has been a wave against the recognition of the legal recognition of gender, which is very strange because many countries have moved toward more self-determination models of gender recognition, as corresponds to the consensus in human rights and the human rights decisions, and including the European Court of Human Rights decisions on the matter, and have seen absolutely no issue and no raise in the assorted problems that these people have been claiming. But unfortunately, this has reached an audience which goes a bit beyond the traditional circles of the anti-gender, anti-abortion groups. And unfortunately, because it sounds, it plays on fears, and it's on a very small percentage of the population that many people do not know. Unfortunately, some people are buying into this narrative and spreading it, and that is very problematic. And we've seen this in the UK, for instance, where the incidents of transphobic hate have been on the rise in a very serious way. And this is also something that the Fundamental Rights Agency of the European Union has definitely been able to evidence and to show across the European region.
But what do you think the ultimate goal of the groups that started to attack transgender people is?
Well, there is a very strong correlation between trans rights, LGBT rights, and also women's rights in terms of the right to choose, in terms of access to medication, access to care, and sexual and reproductive rights, because hormonal treatments are hormonal treatments, and that could be. Basically, what people have done in the UK, for instance, has put into question the tests that people had been using for access to abortion and to contraceptives for teenagers, and they have broken this test and saying that it wasn't valid for teenagers for a while. This is no longer the case. But this has been overruled. But for a while, that was certainly the object. That was certainly what they were fighting against, and that is very problematic. So there is this aspect. We see this also in the United States, where the anti-trans bills have become more and more linked with "Don't Say Gay" or trans bills, and linked with other bills claiming to protect the rights of women or children by banning so-called LGBT propaganda and any kind of sexual education, comprehensive sexual education. So that's a whole continent of rights which is very interconnected. And of course, the trans issues are the most, not the weakest link, but they're the easiest target in terms of demonizing a group and getting people to agree and getting people on board with the notion that this should be stopped. And this the rules, the bans put forth, the executive orders and the different bills in the US, for instance, have also harmed quite strongly all LGBTI persons, and they correlate with the attacks on women's rights in the US and in the various states. And this is also what we're starting to see in various European countries, such as Hungary, for instance.
You mentioned it there a few times, but a lot of people, notably politicians or others, say they're protecting children or defending women's rights when they propose anti-trans policies. You say that there's proof to the contrary. Tell us a bit more about that.
Well, yes, the idea is that when they say that they are defending, they have the notion that they are defending women and children from a group that is discrete, which is to say that is separate from them, and a group of dangerous people, which of course is not the case, because there are of course trans children, there are LGBTI children, and these persons can be women, whatever your definition of woman. This can correspond to situations. So it's also an attack on these children and these women, and there is no demonstrated incidence of no negative impact on self-determination legislation, for instance, on the rights of women or on the living experiences of women. For instance, when Ireland changed its legislation, this is not something that anyone has seen. There has been no major abuse of the situation. And in sports, or the claims that trans women are kicking women out of sports, other women, cis women, out of sports is also untrue. It's not something that we've seen in a very big way. People have been cherry picking a few cases, but that's simply not necessarily valid, and certainly doesn't. It can be there is a way to deal with the advantages or so-called advantages linked to testosterone in a different way in sports, which everybody can understand, but not outright banning a whole demographic from sports altogether. So there has been absolutely, there is no reason to say that trans rights are in any way a problem for women's rights. We have always been working, as you said, there was a decision by the Supreme Court the other day, which is basically not defining women by saying that it is defining women, that it relies on a biological definition of women, whatever that means, because biology is huge and there are many ways in which you can define biologically a woman. So there's this notion that that there needs to be a definition and that this will protect women, but that's not true. We have had protections in the Equalities Act and in the Anti-Discrimination Act that have protected both women's access to care and to specific elements that correspond to, for instance, the fact of being able to have children and things of the kind, while at the same time also protecting the rights of all women from discrimination, and that very much includes trans women as well. So it simply was no problem to begin with that a definition of womanhood or women would help clarify, especially since it doesn't clarify anything if you look at it really. And there certainly is no issue with children's rights. People are pretending that there is this very strong movement toward more visibility and more awareness of the population of trans persons, and that includes children very much. And that's a good thing. That means that people feel safe enough to express who they are and to ask perhaps for respect for their pronouns from their parents, from their friends. So people have seen that there is not an uptick, but that there are more trans and non-binary children or young people today than there were yesterday. And they've been saying, oh yes, there's a contagion and it's a bad thing in and of itself, which is absolutely not the case. It's not in and of itself a bad thing. It is a marginalized identity. So of course you can be victim of discrimination, but it's not a bad thing to be. And they've misrepresented this fact and saying that there is an epidemic, that people are grooming children or convincing them somehow magically to become trans, which of course it cannot be substantiated and does not correspond to what the children are saying and what the young adults are saying and what adults are saying of what their experience as a child was. And also we're demonizing children because social transition for a child, people are manipulating images of surgical interventions and other assorted treatments, but for children it's just a social change. It's just accepting them for who they are, and that's something that has been accepted as the best practice, and it's what all research into the matter, and I do mean that because this is something that can be checked with all major medical and health-based societies. It has been proven to increase their well-being, to respect them for who they are, and it has been proven to have extremely good outcome, much better than refusing, than having a negative attitude to it. And we are jeopardizing this by using junk science that has very small samples, that is very biased and has not been peer-reviewed or has been retired from circulation because of major flaws. And this is, for me, very dangerous for children's rights overall, because people are intent on having a more aggressive and negative stance on being trans, being non-binary, being gender diverse for children and young people, and this can harm them very strongly in the very short term.
Flora Bolter, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you so much for coming on France 24 and bringing us your insight.
Thank you.
Very much appreciated. You're watching Daybreak here on France 24. A quick break now. Back with more updates in just a few minutes.